Howdy. This is the Views from the Shop podcast for the second time today. If you're watching live, we've got a big show. I've already said we got a big week prepped. So today we've got Jason joining us to talk some bracketology. On X, you can find him at Big Underdog Blog, one of the better follows that you can find in the bracketology world. I believe that in my heart of hearts. This show, of course, exclusively presented by College Basketball Analytics. You can go to cbbanalytics.com right now. Sign up for a free account. Get access to some of the stats I use for every single show. Or you can sign up for a paid account. Use the code SHOT, SCHOTT, short for Views from the Shop podcast and the Shot and Scene Center. And you can get an entire month off an annual subscription and have access to all the stats I have, as well as several Division I college basketball programs that they use to scout, self-scout, and game plan and get ready for games as March Madness comes near. So today, like I said, Jason from Big Underdog Bracketology, one of the better follows you can find. He's the first of a couple bracketologists we will have on the show this week. Jason, thanks for being here. How are you doing on this Sunday evening?
We're good. Thanks for having me. We were really close to having a much less stressful selection Sunday, but we'll see what we can do here.
Yes, I published an episode already today talking about Ohio State's loss to Indiana and all of the implications that come with that. That was a huge game. Let's talk about Indiana, I guess. We don't really care about Indiana. I know for Ohio State's side, it was basically winning in. Is that the case for Indiana now? Are they in the NCAA tournament and have kind of taken a spot potentially from Ohio State?
Yeah, Indiana's resume, I thought heading into the game was slightly behind Ohio State's, but because of they swept Ohio State, and then ultimately now they'll play Oregon in the 8-9 game of the Big Ten tournament. So even if they get beat, that's a loss to a 4 or 5 seed Oregon team. That's not going to be enough to kind of slide them down the bracket. There's probably an outside chance Indiana could end up in Dayton, but Indiana's going to make tournament.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what it seems. Unfortunate for Ohio State, obviously, but that is where the Buckeyes are at this point with the loss. So let's take it. I have said for weeks and weeks and weeks, since probably mid-February, early February, that Ohio State is in a spot right now where it needs to pass in terms of the Archie Miller rule. Needs to finish the season 4 games over 500. So as you look at the resume for Ohio State, if there's fans who love Ohio State football and kind of filter in for Ohio State basketball this time of year, break it down. What is the resume of Ohio State basketball this season?
Well, you've got it. You got it spot on there. The NCAA selection committee has an unwritten rule that they always prefer a team to be 4 games or more over 500. And that's the unwritten rule. So any Ohio State season, if you're talking about as a fan, you just want Ohio State to make the tournament, you want to start out with 18 and 13. That's it. Like that's the minimum. And especially with 68 teams and a kind of a large Big Ten, 18 and 13 most years will get Ohio State in. That was absolutely going to be the case when you rattled off non-conference win over Texas and then the neutral court 20-point win over Kentucky in December. Once you put those two in, you just had to get to 18. Now that included a win at Purdue and they got Maryland as well. So again, they just had to get there. 17 and 14 goes below that threshold. That's the bad news. The good news is this. There have been teams that have been 3 games over 500 that have made the NCAA tournament. The last one was Michigan in 2022. Sorry to mention it, but we've got to go with it. This could help us. 17 and 14 Michigan. They were an 11 seed, and they didn't even have to go to Dayton that year. They ended up making a Sweet 16 that year. So let's compare resumes. The NCAA tournament committee they absolutely go back and check other kind of historical figures. You know, I've heard some podcasts and listened to people, talk to some people. They go back and they chart that. So again, Michigan in 2022, 17, 14, they were 5 and 9 in quad 1. Ohio State is 6 and 11 as of now. They were 3 and 3 in quad 2. Ohio State's 3 and 3 now. I went over Iowa and moved that up a little bit. What's interesting is Michigan had a quad 3 loss that year. And Ohio State, of course, does not. Now, each year is different. The bubble's different every year. This year, I actually believe the bubble this year is probably one of the weaker that we've ever had. And so it's not about the quantity, or it's not about the quality of wins for Ohio State. It's pure quantity. It's pure quantity. It's as simple as this. If you flip any game, Northwestern, Oregon, any game, the Pitt game really stands out. They're in the tournament, and it's not even close. They are absolutely in, and they're probably not going to Dayton. The committee just makes you pay when you don't get over that 4-game threshold. But there's still a chance. There's still a chance, and it absolutely has to start with a must-win game. They have to beat Iowa on Wednesday, and then chances are they're going to have to beat a really kind of hot Illinois team now on Thursday.
So let's start with that Iowa game. Just this could be a quick yes, no. If Ohio State loses to Iowa, their chances of going to the NCAA tournament are 0%. Would you say true or false on that?
True.
Okay. So obviously we know Iowa is a must-win game. For those who listen to this show constantly, you know that I rarely use a term must-win. We were back in December when Ohio State was facing Auburn, and people had the audacity to say that that game was a must-win game for Ohio State. Sure, I understand where you're coming from. I get the emotional pull of the game and how it can maybe give you a boost for the rest of the season. Same thing with the Kentucky game. But a must-win? No, that was not a must-win. Where we are now, of course, is must-win territory. And that's where Ohio State was down the stretch, too. When you had the 4-game stretch to close the year with UCLA, with USC, with Nebraska, and, of course, the last game Ohio State just played with Indiana, you needed to win 3 of those 4 in order to be guaranteed to be in the NCAA tournament. So one thing you mentioned that's interesting is the resume at this point for Ohio State. It's not about quality. It's about quantity. They've got the quad 1 record. They've got the quality wins. They've got some quad 1A wins as well at this point. So as you examine the entire bubble as a whole right now, how do you compare Ohio State's strengths and weaknesses with other teams on the bubble at this point? How does the committee see Ohio State compared to others on the bubble?
I think they were really close to get the benefit of the doubt for multiple reasons, and they still might. And here's why, if you're an Ohio State fan, why you do have some hope. They have 6 quad 1 wins. And now quad 1 wins aren't everything, but they are the NCAA has created the net. And it's less about using the net as a ranking. Your number, your ranking is less important than the quadrant based wins that you have or the quadrant based losses that you have. So Ohio State has 6 quad 1 wins. That's the top tier. The teams around them, the teams around them they will battle this out for. No one has half of that. Xavier has 1. They're 1-8. Carolina's 1-11. Boise's 2-5. Colorado State's 1-5. UC San Diego 2-1. UC Irvine 1-1. Dayton is 3-3, and VCU is 2-1. Again, no one has more than 3. So they have the benefit out there. Here's the other thing that's really critical that will keep Ohio State in the conversation. It is not always prevalent in bracketology work. It's not always prevalent on some of the internet pieces articles you'll read. Ohio State's non-conference strength of schedule is 41st in the country. Xavier's is 145th. A lot of these other schools are in the triple digits, and VCU is 276. Again, Ohio State's 41. They went out, they played people, and traditionally, the NCAA tournament committee, when it is very close, they factor in big wins and your non-conference strength of schedule. Did you go play people? Ohio State did, so they still have a chance there.
So that's the one thing that I question about Jake Diebler being at Ohio State, starting year 1 with a completely rebuilt roster. You had everyone kind of questioning, hey, you just added Auburn, like potentially the number 1 team in the nation this year. That's the last team that Ohio State added to its schedule for this upcoming year. And I question it. I said this team could get off to a really slow start and then hit its stride late January, early February. And that's exactly what happened. That's not a pat on the back of myself. I've made plenty of wrong guesses as well on this show, but Ohio State picked up some quality wins and that really helped them. So at this point, I can ask the question, is Ohio State in right now? It really doesn't matter. I think one thing that I'd love to hear your explanation on, Jason, you're the subject matter expert here. I see Ohio State fans saying today, yesterday, these bracketologists have Ohio State in the last 4 in. They're in the field right now. But it doesn't matter because if you lose to Iowa, you're not getting in. And if you beat Iowa, maybe you've got a shot. So take me through just the thought process of how a lot of bracketologists see of Ohio State right now and how it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's good. 2 really good points, Tim. So the first one is You're exactly right about the strength of schedule. If literally they take Auburn out and they put in Southeast Missouri State and they beat Southeast Missouri State, Ohio State's in the NCAA tournament. And that's what the committee's job is, to evaluate and give a fair crack at these teams trying to make the games relevant in November and December. That's why a lot of teams in the past 5 years, they've had good records, but their non-conference strength of schedule has been poor, and that's why they haven't made the tournament when they're on the bubble. So again, Ohio State has a chance there. The second piece is this. I have Ohio State right now still in the tournament. I have the second to last team in. They sit somewhere between San Diego State and then Xavier's behind them. Most people would have Xavier a spot above, but a 1-8 quad one, that's a tough go. So they're right there with Xavier. Everybody believes Xavier's going to make the tournament. Everybody believes Ohio State will not. It's going to be less about some of these teams in front of them, because they're not going to catch a lot of these teams right now. As much, can you just kind of hang in there? So here we go. The NCAA tournament traditionally has 2.5 bid thieves per year. So let's say so somewhere between 2 and 3 bids are taken each year. And this is a really critical piece, because it's not just about what Ohio State does. It's about all the stuff that happens around them. So what's a bid thief? A bid thief is a team that makes the NCAA tournament that takes a automatic qualifying bid because they won their conference tournament. Okay, so if you win your conference tournament, no matter what conference it is, you make it. Well, for example, last year, 5 teams that had no plans of making the tournament won their conference tournament and knocked out 5 other spots. So the bubble kind of got eroded. This year, Ohio State needs 0 to 1. Like, that's the path. So as much as our games matter, all these other games matters too. Step 1 was very quietly in St. Louis today, was the Missouri Valley. Drake, for example, is going to make the NCAA tournament, probably on the back of the 10 line, middle of the 10 line. They were going to make the tournament. If Bradley beats Drake today, then the Missouri Valley gets 2 teams. They didn't. That's step 1. It's going to be kind of a step process, and I'll try to lay it out on X for Ohio State fans. I'll try to lay it out tomorrow, kind of all the steps you need. But that was step 1 that Drake held on. Now you got to get it in the realm of these kind of teams around you. So if we kind of go around and let's take a look, I think the team that they are just going to be in an all-out brawl with right now to get in the tournament is Xavier. Xavier has a much better record, 21-10. But again, 1-8 in quad one, they won at Marquette, and then 8-2, but really only 2 of those 8 are any good. UConn and Creighton, they both at home. So they don't have a lot on the resume, but they've got a nice record. Again, their non-conference strength schedule is 145, so not nearly as good. So if you're an Ohio State fan, and Ohio State, let's say we win, Wednesday, and I say being we because I try to put on a very fair hat, but I do have a degree from Ohio State. So when in doubt, I say we. But if we look at this, the Xavier is the 4 seed in the Big East tournament. So the game of all games really that you're watching on top of Ohio State games is a Thursday afternoon game, the 4-5 game versus Marquette. Xavier has to lose. You've got to get some of these teams out of the way because someone's going to steal a bid. So Xavier needs to get beat. The other games of really critical importance for Ohio State are, can't believe I'm saying this, in the Big West. The Big West has 2 teams that are vying for an at-large spot, at-large being a team selected that don't win the tournament. Now, in the Big West, UC San Diego and UC Irvine have been really good all year, 26-4 and 26-5, like really good records, pretty good statistically, and they kind of beat each other. So they got some quad one wins because of it. UC San Diego is a little bit ahead. They won at Utah State, which will be an at-large team. So the Big West games on a Friday night are going to matter as well. There could be a scenario where the tournament says, hey, UC San Diego, they played people, they're 27-5. Like, we're going to let them in over a 14 or 15 or 15 loss Ohio State team. So I think Xavier and UC San Diego, crazy, are kind of the most the teams most likely to steal a bid from Ohio State, but it's going to be, the conference tournaments will play a part too.
We've got Jason here from Big Underdog Bracketology on Twitter. You can find him at Big Underdog Blog. You can also find him on his website at big-underdog.com. Have loved following Jason for the past 2 seasons. Excellent follow. And probably the one who's updating brackets the most often. It's not daily, but it's about every other day, especially once you get into February and obviously now into March. So an absolutely great follow. Appreciate you being here today, Jason. For those of you who are coming in late, give Jason a follow on X, please, and follow his stuff on his website as well. So you mentioned some potential bid stealers.
Yep.
Let's talk about Ohio State at this point and where it could go. You mentioned some teams that you need to see lose. If let's say we have 2 or 3 bid stealers,
Yep.
Ohio State wins against Iowa, and then they win against Illinois. What are the percent chances of Ohio State being in at that point? Are we sitting on our couches on Sunday at 6:30 p.m. and hoping that final spot is going to go to Ohio State? Are we feeling confident? What are your thoughts there?
I'd say if they beat Iowa only and then lose to Illinois, just to help you with that percentage, I'd say probably 30%. I'd say if they beat Iowa and beat Illinois, probably about 65%. And the reason why it's not higher is because they're still going to be behind Indiana, and they're still going to be behind an Oklahoma team likely, and all these Mountain West teams kind of beat each other, so they don't really have bad losses. Whether it's Utah State or San Diego State, they're a little bit ahead of Boise State and Colorado State, but there's not a lot of places to go. The Xavier game is the game. Like Xavier has to lose. Xavier has to lose. That's a really big one. Again, the Big West games. I could see a spot where Dayton and VCU, one of those teams, hopefully Chalk wins and VCU just takes the A-10. You'd prefer if Dayton loses too. They should be ahead of Dayton because Dayton has, a quad 3 loss to UMass. But I would say it's about 2/3 of a chance they get in with the Illinois win as well. The reality is it's just they're going to steal bids, and there's not a lot of places to go because at that point, whenever they get beat, that's 15 losses. And it's hard to make the NCAA tournament with 15 losses. As crazy as it sounds, it's fairly straightforward to make the tournament with 14 losses. It's the magic number. I see in the chat, the pit loss. I said at the time in November, the pit loss absolutely very likely will be what keeps them out of the tournament. I thought that in November. And the scary thing is it's unfortunately probably going to be the case. But they just got to take care of business, right? They got to keep winning. I will say this. A lot of times you'll see on social media when teams play in conference tournaments, a team wins and announcers or bracketologists, people say they're in. That's not the case. Traditionally, the NCAA tournament committee has valued wins and losses both ways in conference tournaments much less than people kind of living in the moment do. So they don't carry the same weight. And here's another reason why. The selection committee this year has 5 new members. The people doing it for the first time ever, they're going to want to get this thing in and get it ready and get it checked and do these things. And I've talked to some people kind of in the industry. There's a lot of chatter about this thing kind of getting settled in a little bit earlier this year with almost half the committee being new. And so you just don't get the reward and the payback necessarily. You don't get full credit. You don't get full credit for conference tournament wins. And so the Illinois game, you might see on social media they're going to get in. That won't necessarily be the case, but boy, they're going to need at least that probably.
And it's interesting you mentioned that too. So I've talked about that a little bit. The conference tournament doesn't mean as much as we think. So you think most people right now have Ohio State in the field.
Yeah.
So if you get the win over Iowa, you lose to Illinois, you think there's a higher chance Ohio State gets the benefit of a doubt over a similar team like an Oklahoma or a Xavier or any other team that may be just outside the bubble at this point? If it's even, you're splitting hairs, are you just rolling with the team that was already in the tournament before conference tournament week started?
I think so. And that's why Xavier's so critical. I just don't see them catching. Arkansas's in. Baylor's had a bumpy year. Just keep in mind, whenever you evaluate Baylor's record, they played a Division II team, so they actually have one less win than everybody gives them credit for. And the committee only values Division I wins. I think Arkansas and Baylor are going to get in. Same with Vanderbilt, probably around the 10 line or so. I think Indiana's in now, unfortunately. I mean, that's just you're behind. Again, you're behind the traffic, and the Indy can't pick up a bad loss. Oklahoma's in. Maybe there's a scenario where, it gets dicey with a Mountain West team, whether it's Utah State or San Diego State, but I don't think you can create the traffic. So it's really down to, They've got to outlast Xavier, and they can't have more than two bid stealers take the bids. I mean, that's the number. Anything more than two, and they really don't have much of a chance. I will say this: the bubble around them is so weak. There's just not a lot of teams. Traditionally, at this stage, Tim, I've got about 12 teams. So first four out, next four out, and in the hunt. I don't even have an in the hunt. There's not all this traffic behind them. There just isn't. And that's the good news. And that's why if they had beat Indiana, there's no one catching them. Like I said, them and Xavier right now are in. Behind them is, let's go through the teams one more time for everybody listening to kind of for rooting interest. The teams behind them, Nebraska eliminated themselves today. So that's one less team you have to worry about. Nebraska lost at home to Iowa, and Nebraska didn't make the Big Ten tournament. Keep in mind, 3 teams don't. So Nebraska, they're not going to put a team in that didn't make the Big Ten tournament. It's crazy. Okay, so Nebraska's done. Boise and Colorado State are going to kind of play things out on the on the bottom half of the Mountain West. So we'll see. Boise has San Diego State on Thursday. Colorado State eventually probably plays Utah State. If neither Boise State or Colorado State makes the Mountain West finals, they're not getting in. We talked about the Big West teams maybe, and then we talked about the A10 teams. Other than that, that's it. There's no other traffic. Ohio State beat Texas in a neutral court, obviously the first night of the season. They got that win. So any conversation about Ohio State and Texas is going to lean towards Ohio State. Texas would have to probably win 3 games in the SEC tournament, which good luck. I mean, the SEC's historically good this year. Head-to-head isn't all that valuable unless you sweep. Indiana did. But if it's this close with Ohio State and Texas, they would lean Ohio State, plus Ohio State's metrics are better too. So again, it's not the teams around them that are going to pass them. It's the bid stealers. The bid stealers are going to come in. When you get some random team that wins a league, for example, last year NC State won, and in the Pac-12, Oregon won. Those 2 teams were not going to make the tournament last year. They literally took spots. They took Seton Hall and St. John's last year, and they took them out of the tournament. So it's those kind of periphery teams that win these conference tournaments that ultimately will be probably what puts Ohio State out. So if you're watching a tournament and you're not sure what's going on and you're just kind of new to this, root for whatever has a 1 next to them on the conference. You want all chalk. Like you want one teams to keep on winning because ultimately that's what Ohio State needs. They would need the teams in place to take care of business so people don't steal bids.
One team I'm not sure we've really had the chance to talk about yet is Oklahoma. That's a really interesting team. A lot of people are talking about how they'd rather see some team from some mid-major conference make it in over Oklahoma because a team that wins 3 games in the conference doesn't deserve to get in. And everyone has their right to their own opinion. The fact of the matter is we have precedent for teams like this in the past who play in a really, really good conference. We know how good the SEC is this year. Oklahoma plays in a really good conference. They haven't won a lot of conference games. That goes against them. But again, there's precedent. So take me through a team like Oklahoma. Is that much of a threat for Ohio State at this point? Should they get a win or 2 in the SEC tournament?
Good question. Yesterday, Ohio State played Indiana, of course, right? And then the other kind of true bubble game was Texas against Oklahoma. And Oklahoma went to Texas and won. And basically that was kind of a cage match. So I think Oklahoma's in. Oklahoma, like Ohio State, has 6 quad 1 wins, but better than Ohio State. They were 13-0 in the non-conference. And so they're 19-12. So they're well above the 4 games. And although they've been very shaky at times in the SEC, they have wins over Arizona, Louisville, Arkansas, Missouri, Michigan, Texas, and they're getting in. Right. That's too many wins. That's a better resume than Ohio State at 19-12 versus 17-14. That's more tournament wins. Oklahoma's in. And that's why you get to this stage and everybody's played about 31 games. There's not a lot of areas for Ohio State to break through and catch people. The best case scenario is just kind of hang in there. Bids don't get stolen and you find a trip to Dayton. There's really no path unless Ohio State is playing on CBS the day of Selection Sunday on Ohio State avoiding Dayton. Best case scenario, make the road trip and cheer them on in Dayton and then make a run. Keep in mind, though, teams that have gone to Dayton have been really successful. A lot of Sweet 16 game teams have gone through Dayton. So it's not the end of the world. Like I said, a Michigan team that was 17-14 just a couple years ago made a run of the Sweet 16. all is not lost. We know this, right? Ohio State, when they really shoot the ball well from the perimeter, when Thornton's on his game, can make runs. They can be impressive. If you beat Kentucky by 20 on a neutral court, or if you win at Purdue, you've got the talent level to make a Sweet 16. The issue is how many bids get stolen away. And like I said, I can't emphasize enough, the Xavier game on Thursday afternoon versus Marquette is appointment television if you're an Ohio State fan. That like part of the dominoes to fall are winning 2 games and needing Xavier to lose, and then needing a lot of bids to not be stolen.
Cannot wait for that Xavier game. There's games you zero in on every conference tournament week, and it can be so fun. It can be so stressful at the same time. I've said on this show plenty of times, just do your best to have fun with it. I know it's stressful. I know it can be infuriating. That loss yesterday in Indiana was about as angry as I've been all season. But man, you wipe the slate clean, and now you get to go play Iowa and have a chance to go play your way into the NCAA tournament. You mentioned Dayton. I had 2 other things I wanted to cover here. One was that if Ohio State makes the NCAA tournament, let's say, I feel like the most likely scenario right now is you beat Iowa and then you lose to Illinois.
Yep.
Let's say that's the case and Ohio State sneaks in. You said they're playing in Dayton. Kind of paint me the picture of if there are fans who like to travel and watch Ohio State basketball. They play in Dayton. Sounds like that's about 100% certainty at this point. After Dayton, are there any cities, are there any teams that Ohio State you could see them potentially being paired with based on the past of how the committee handles pairing teams and things like that? And kind of take me through, let's say they make the tournament. Where are we going?
Yeah, good question. So they're either going to be, if Ohio State plays in Dayton, they're going to be on the back of the 11 line or the front of the 12 line. It just depends on how some of the conference tournaments shake out. So let's say they're on the back of the 11 line. So as an 11 seed, if they can get through, maybe they play a San Diego State or Utah State or something, or maybe even a Xavier, basically a road game. Maybe they kind of punch through that. Then you're getting into the 6 seed world. Obviously, they're going to keep them away from a team like UCLA because it's in conference. So you're probably in that realm of like like an Ole Miss, right, or a St. Mary's or a BYU. Here's the reality of this: if Ohio State played those teams, they'd only be probably 2.5, 3.5 point underdog to most of those teams. And that's how talented Ohio State has been. They've lost a tremendous amount of home games when they were favorite. Let's keep this in mind. When they played Michigan State, early in the Big Ten season, they were a home favorite against Michigan State, right? Pitt, Northwest, all these games, Northwestern, they were 10.5 point favorite. So Vegas understands Ohio State's talent level, and they could absolutely go get these teams, on the 6-11 line. That an 11 seed wins 40% of the time. So it's not like some crazy math number. It's, it's not a coin flip, but as an 11 seed going against a 6 seed, and these 6 seed teams are all happy right now, and Ohio State's going to be in a dogfight all week. But if they get in and they get through, history says 40% chance of beating a 6 seed, which isn't too bad.
So let's close off the show with this. Paint me the picture of how Ohio State gets in. We know 0% shot. If Ohio State loses to Iowa, they're not going to the NCAA tournament. We had a question in here earlier asking if Ohio State has a chance at the NCAA tournament. The answer is 100%
Absolutely.
yes. They're
Absolutely
not anywhere close to out of the NCAA tournament. They lose to Iowa, they are. They beat Illinois. They win that game, or they lose that game. Take me through, what does Ohio State have to do to be 100% locked in on Selection Sunday, and kind of the path each round of the Big Ten tournament? Where do you see Ohio State moving forward in terms of NCAA tournament likelihood? You're planting your flag at this point on Sunday night.
I think if you see Ohio State playing on CBS on Saturday, then they're going to make the tournament for sure. Okay, so let's lock them. That means they got a lot of work to do, right? That means they beat Iowa, they beat Illinois, and they beat a very good Maryland team, which they've done this year, but this is neutral court. So if they're playing on, in front of Raftery on Saturday afternoon on CBS, they'll be in the tournament. Let's back up. Like I said, about 30% chance if you just beat Iowa. I think the most traditional path of them getting in is this. The most realistic path of them actually making the tournament is this. Beat Iowa, beat Illinois. Okay, those two. You don't have to beat Maryland, but you're going to need some help. So beat Iowa, beat Illinois. Xavier loses Thursday to Marquette. UC San Diego wins the Big West. Can't believe I'm saying this, but that's part of the deal, right? VCU wins the A10, and Utah State or San Diego State or New Mexico needs to win the Mountain West. Those are the things. We do not want Boise State or Colorado State winning those. So again, they got to probably beat Illinois as well. Iowa and Illinois need Xavier to lose the first round. UC San Diego to win the Big West. VCU to win the A10, and New Mexico, Utah State, or San Diego State to win the Mountain West. Those are kind of the pieces. And I know that's crazy. It's a lot of pieces. Also, you're going to see a lot of rhetoric this week about North Carolina. Everybody needs to relax. They're 1-11 in quad one wins. So, like, let's take a step back. Even if crazy thing is this, these teams, even if they beat Duke in a neutral court to get to the finals, they still probably have to win because that's 1/3 of quad one wins Ohio State has. So people need to pump the brakes on some of these teams. Again, at the end of the year, people have these kind of big swings that yesterday, if North Carolina beat Duke at home, that they'd be in the tournament. That's absolutely false. That's absolutely false. And it's just people it gains steam. They talked about all year, we heard about SMU. SMU hasn't beaten one team that's going to qualify for the tournament. Wake Forest is very similar. So everybody just take a step back. These teams have already played 31 games. The hay's in the barn. And Ohio State's hanging in there. They need help, though. They need help. They got to do some, and they need some help around them. But I'd say those are the paths. They don't have to beat Maryland to make the tournament. 2 wins is probably going to be fine. But again, it's the bid stealing around them that's really going to be the difference.
So it sounds like, to summarize for Ohio State, you must beat Iowa. You probably really, really, really need to beat Illinois. If you don't, you're going to need a lot of luck. So If you beat Illinois, if you beat Iowa, you beat the Archie Miller rule as well.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Xavier loses first day against Marquette. You get some more chalk. There's at least an okay likelihood that Ohio State makes the tournament.
Yes.
If you have a couple of those things come into play.
Yeah, I'd say two wins and a Xavier win is probably 60%. 2 wins and a Xavier loss is probably 75%. I know it's crazy, but there's just not sorry to interrupt you. There's just not a lot of teams they're going to catch them. It's going to be teams that steal a bid. It's not going to be a bunch of these teams passing them because they don't have the resume Ohio State has. That's why the 2 wins is important, because you get more than 4 games over 500. You're exactly right.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate all of the context that you've added today, Jason. Anything else you'd add on Ohio State and say a tournament likelihood, anything like that? If not, plug your stuff and brag away.
I don't think so. In terms of additional pieces, we've kind of hit it on the head a lot. But again, if you've got any of the apps pulled up, or ESPN or CBS, whatever you use to track, always root for the 1 seed in all the conference tournaments all the way through. Just root for those teams to win, because those teams are already likely have a spot in the dance. And also, they don't need to schedule so hard in the non-conference next year. Let's not overthink it here. Anything that's double digits in the 80s or 90s is just fine. Anything in the 120s is just fine. But keeping in the top 40 with a roster that was still trying to figure it out and gel together was a very ambitious schedule. But they still have a chance, right? They still have a chance, and ultimately something to be excited about in the last week.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining again. Make sure you're following him on X at Big Underdog Blog. If you haven't gotten there and followed him, I 100% think that you should. And I should almost make it a requirement. You can also find him on his website, big-underdog.com. He is posting well thought out, well laid out seed lines, along with an entire bracket, last 4 in, first 4 out, all of those different types of things. So make sure you're following on X and checking out his website, especially this week. A lot of stuff is going to go down. So I appreciate you, Jason, joining the show today. It's been absolutely excellent. If you've listened or watched along live, appreciate you being here. Make sure you follow at The Shot Pod on X, at The Shot Pod on Instagram. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube as well. You can subscribe, and you will get year-round Ohio State basketball coverage, the only podcast covering Ohio State basketball year-round exclusively make sure you subscribe. Appreciate you listening today. I will shut up before you shut me off, and go Bucks.